Before I, Kevin Hawken, tell my story, I should tell you a little about some strange interests and personality traits that I have that developed early in my life, probably at the very beginning of my adolescence. Even though I did all the usual masculine macho things like sports, games, fighting, wild behavior, etc., I always appreciated the arts. I liked all art, from classical to modern, from paintings and sculptures to performance art, especially if the subjects are women. Away from male friends, I even read about different types of beauty, trying to define them not only in art, but also in life, and constantly drew beautiful women with a pencil. I would love to paint beautiful women on canvas, but I couldn't afford the high-end materials that would allow me to create real works of art. The various forms of female beauty that I identified, including examples of famous women, were as follows. Unstoppable. There is something aesthetically edgy about an unstoppable beauty. She often has dark vibes, rich lips, and perfectly contoured eyes and eyebrows. I think Beyoncé and Angelina Jolie are good examples. Innocence. There is something whole in an innocent beauty. She has an open face, large, expressive, multicolored eyes, and natural hair color. She is shy and very feminine. An ingenue in literature. Perhaps the most classic example is the young Audrey Hepburn, and in our time, perhaps Amy Adams. Uncompromising. There is athletic strength in an uncompromising beauty. She is tall and muscular, with well-defined features, a huskier voice than usual, and a feisty, independent personality. Think Gina Carano, Ronda Rousey, or Venus Williams. Plasticity. There is an inexplicable appeal to a plastic beauty, almost like a ceramic doll rather than a real person. She probably has fake tan, false nails, plastic surgery, bleached blonde hair, and is very thin. Can you tell this is not Paris Hilton? Femininity. Feminine beauty has an appeal between the dark vibes of a fierce beauty and the lightness of an ingenue. She takes care of her appearance, but there is nothing artificial about her. Classic examples are everyone's favorite Jennifer Aniston and Sandra Bullock. I identified another category. I grew up in a municipality on the outskirts of a large metropolis. In my community, there was significant disparity in the economic status of different areas. Luckily, no one lived below the poverty line, at least not that I knew. But about a third of the population struggled to make ends meet. About 60% were middle class, and about 7% were very rich. I come from a middle-class family. We had a good life, but there was nothing pretentious or ostentatious about us. Most rich kids either went to private school or were brats. There was one big exception, my best friend. His name was Bradley Brayton Van Rensselaer, but he only responded to Van. Everyone called him that except his stepmother, who invariably called him Bradley. Van was an excellent athlete, smart, a good guy, and so humble that he seemed almost embarrassed by his father's wealth. If you hadn't been to his house or seen his father's Bentley, you would never have thought that Van came from big money. There was something else about Van. He was the best-looking guy around and always treated women with respect. And since I always hung out with him, we were both 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighing 194 pounds. And I myself was decent-looking. We never lacked female companionship. Starting at the age of 18, when we were juniors in high school, we had more than enough attention. Van and I competed in lacrosse in the spring and fall and in swimming in the winter. When Van was in 8th grade, his mother died in a tragic accident. And when Van was in his sophomore year, his father, George, married Van's stepmother, Allegra. Van's only friend invited to the wedding was me, and that was the first time I saw Allegra. She was 29 at the time, and Van and I were 17, both starting school a year later than most kids for various, unimportant reasons. When I was introduced to Allegra, we both had a strange reaction. Her eyes widened, she swallowed, was silent for a good 5 or 6 seconds, and then seemed to turn on and act the same as she did with everyone else. Despite the electric charge, my first impression of Allegra was that she was a rich bitch. Perhaps my opinion of her was tainted by Ven's opinion because he didn't like her. I think because she took his mother's place, and he was not happy with that, especially since his father married her only 2 years after his mother's death. However, after a while, Ven warmed up to her when he realized that she was not trying to replace his mother, but was really interested in his success and well-being. By the middle of our junior years, he already liked her, and had no need for money. But I didn't attach much importance to his theories. Since I often visited Van's house, and she was always a polite hostess and was interested in Van's life, and since I was his best friend, then mine, I not only saw Allegra, but also talked to her often. She didn't fit into any of the categories of beauty that I identified when judging aesthetics. Allegra never had unkempt hair. Her makeup, except when she was working out and not wearing makeup, always looked professionally applied, and I never saw her in clothes, including tracksuits, that didn't look new and had creases. Her posture and mannerisms were most likely the same as they were taught in the good old school. She was far from warm, but not cold either. I never heard her say anything approaching bad taste, let alone swearing. She had the largest vocabulary of anyone I've ever interacted with. Moreover, her diction was impeccable. Allegra was universally prim and proper, polite to everyone, including me. Her body was slender, but not thin, and her face was alluring. For Allegra's beauty, I had to come up with a new classification. Correct. However, there was more to her than just the right kind of beauty, which was very difficult for me to define. There was something mysterious about her that always slightly bothered me, but at the same time attracted me to her. It haunted me, and being around her, I often stuttered. The worst time I stuttered around Allegra was when, one day at Van's house, she said that she had seen some of my sketches of women exhibited at our high school's amateur art fair, and asked me a few questions about them, and my appreciation of art. Some of the questions asked whether the women I drew were real models, or figments of my imagination. Since it was only after I posted the drawing that I realized that one of them looked very much like Allegra, I felt very embarrassed. Luckily, Van saved me from too much discussion by demanding that we throw a lacrosse ball around the vast grounds of his mansion. Van's father, George, loved me very much, because I was not only a good friend of Van's, but also because I kept him confident in certain things that I knew and which he would prefer not to make public. And I will never say what those things were. Sometimes, in my presence, he told Allegra that I was the most secretive young man he had ever met. One early Saturday summer afternoon after high school, when Van and I were 19 years old and making plans to attend different colleges, both on lacrosse scholarships, he called me in a panic. "Kevin, buddy, you have to do me a favor," he urged. "What's the matter, dude?" I just remembered that I promised Allegra that I would move all my sports equipment from the garage. My father is out of town and she has a big charity event tonight, and the caterer needs space to set up a mobile kitchen. If I don't move it, she'll either get mad or just throw my crap out or dump it in a pile somewhere and damage it. I can't move him because Julie and I are 50 miles away and we have our own plans. You have to move it for me, brother," he said excitedly. "No problem, dude. I'll go there now," I grinned. Even though I was wearing a tank top and shorts, I had just gotten out of the shower after weightlifting, I didn't see the point in changing for physical labor. When I got to Van's house, I rang the doorbell and was surprised when Allegra answered instead of the maid. She was wearing her typical outfit, a starched tight pleated skirt, nylon stockings, 7.5-centimeter heels, and a fluffy blusa. It all looked as if it had been taken from a Neiman Marcus catalog. It was so chic and expensive. "Hello, Kevin," she said politely. Hello, Mrs. Van Rensselaer," I managed to say. "Van left and won't, be back for a while, and he asked me to move his sports equipment, since it's in your way." "Very good, Kevin. You're obviously a good friend of Bradley's. This is in the garage. Follow me and I'll show you where to put everything." I followed Allegra, trying not to focus on her butt, moving back and forth as she walked in her high heels. She showed me the equipment, showed me where in the finished basement I should place it, and emphasized that everything should be stored neatly. It's not that I don't trust you, Kevin, but could you call me over to take a look when you're done? Of course, Mrs. Van Rensselaer, I choked. For some reason, I was nervous for the first 5 minutes while I was carrying Van's things, probably due to dealing with Allegra. Then he calmed down. Van had a ton of equipment, including about 20 lacrosse sticks, a lacrosse goal, several tennis rackets, an ornate croquet set, a badminton net and set, and even some stuff I didn't recognize. It took me a good half hour to transfer everything. Having finished, I went upstairs from the basement and called, "Mrs. Van Rensselaer, I'm done." Allegra came out of the kitchen, smiled at me, and then walked down the stairs to the finished basement. While I was leaning against the shelves a couple of meters away from her, she looked around. "You did a great job, Kevin." Then she sat down on the low table next to the shelves and put her right foot on the chair. "Before you go, Kevin, I wanted to ask you something, if you don't mind." Sure, Mrs. Van Rensselaer," I answered, hesitantly. At this moment, I looked at her lower body. Her black nylon stockings ended mid-thigh, apparently held in place by red garters. I know I was sweating and probably unconsciously licking my lips. Her first few questions were innocuous. She asked about Van and his new girlfriend, Julie. She smiled slightly as she asked them. Given that I had a hard time distracting myself from the sight, I thought I answered the questions well, even if the answers included a lot of oohs, hms, and gulps. Then her smile disappeared. "Van said you got an A in Advanced Placement English. Is that true, Kevin?" I nodded my head affirmatively. "Then why do you always stutter around me?" she asked, spreading her legs as wide as she could, given the restrictions of her skirt. Well, I don't, actually, I don't know," I answered, stuttering, feeling the swelling in my armpits and forehead. Sweat. "Why are your pants tightening?" was her next question. I looked down. She was right. I probably blushed. I couldn't think of anything to say, so I stayed silent. "Was I depicted in one of your drawings from the fair?" I don't even remotely remember what I muttered in response to this question. "Are you really the most secretive person George knows?" After some delay, I mumbled, "Maybe, I think, yeah. Do you have an uncontrollable attraction to me?" I didn't answer. "Don't you think that since there is no one around, you can take possession of me without consequences?" she asked, looking straight into my eyes, like a cobra at its prey. After a long delay, during which neither of us said anything, I suddenly began to move like an automaton under the compulsion of some higher being, completely out of control. I walked up to her and slid my right hand under her skirt between her thighs until I reached her squelching slit. She moaned and closed her eyes for a moment when I touched her. Then her eyes opened wide and she looked at me challengingly. Running my right hand between her thighs, I unbuttoned her blouse with more dexterity than ever before with my left. When the last button was undone, I pulled the skirts of the blouse apart, revealing shockingly large, bare, beautiful mammary glands. While I was so busy that I didn't notice anything, Allegra was also busy undoing her belt and zipper. I broke contact with her for a few seconds, shedding my shorts and boxers and stepping out of them. She used this time to unzip her skirt, lift her ass, and stretch it out in front of her. Having thrown off the clothes covering the lower part of the body, I pulled her skirt all the way off, took off my shirt and her blouse, and everything was on autopilot. No schoolgirl, that was my experience, could have sex like the tigress that Allegra became. Finally, I moved my upper body away from hers. For the next few minutes, my mind was in a fog. When she stood up and turned around, for the first time in as long as I had known her, the hair on her head was disheveled and sweat was glistening all over her body. After a few minutes of catching her breath, she gathered her clothes. I was shocked to see that her blue patent leather high heels were still there, and said with a sigh, "I think I need to take a shower before the attendants arrive." I felt what I thought it would be like to be drunk, my mind foggy and my vision blurry, but I could clearly see her stumbling towards me. She kissed my lips again, then ran her finger over them and said, This is our little secret. Just before she reached the stairs, I shouted, "Maybe we can repeat it?" As it was obviously the best experience of my life up to this point. She silently turned her head, flashed a devilish smile, and wordlessly continued up the stairs. Clearly, my thoughts had been going haywire all weekend. When I went to a party on Saturday night, at least a dozen of my male and female friends asked something like, "What's wrong with you today, Kevin? You look like your mind is on another planet and your eyes don't seem to be functioning." "I just had a life-changing experience," I answered with a smile. "And no, I'm not going to talk about it." Luckily, my summer job involved intense manual labor that required my concentration or risk of injury. So I was forced to put Allegra and her perfect body and energetic manners out of my mind. However, at night, lying awake, I was consumed with thoughts of her and my mind-blowing experience with her. I worried that she was ruining me for any other woman, which was at least partially confirmed by several sexual experiences I had with high school girls and one college girl throughout the summer. They didn't even come close to matching Allegra's true beauty. Several times over the summer, I tried to contact Allegra, but without success. Of course, I saw her, Van's guest, but she acted the same as always, and I tried not to drool, so I don't think anyone realized that I was in love with her. On Friday, the day before Van was to leave for college, the Rensselaers hosted a pool party at their house. Even though Allegra was wearing a conservative one-piece swimsuit, she still wowed me. And I didn't make a fool of myself just because I was wearing mirrored sunglasses and loose swim trunks. Allegra treated me no differently than everyone else, polite and warily friendly. On the Sunday morning after a pool party, 2 days before I left for college, I received a call on my cell phone from an unfamiliar number. I thought it was probably a request for help, but I answered anyway. After I said hello, I quickly determined from the melodious, perfect diction of the voice on the other end that it was Allegra, even if she didn't say her name. "Hello, Kevin. This is Mrs. Van Rensselaer. I'm guessing you're getting ready to go to college." "Yes, I'm getting ready." "I'm leaving on Tuesday," I answered without hesitation. "Then I'm glad I called today. Kevin, I have a graduation college leaving gift for you. I hope you can come by around noon so I can give it to you." "Certainly. You didn't have to give me anything, but I'm sure I'd be grateful." "At noon." "Then I'll see you by the pool," she said before ending the conversation. I tried to suppress expectations. I didn't know if George, the maid, or the gardener would be there, or if she would even be interested in another sexual interlude with me, but, of course, deep down, I sincerely hoped for another union of bodies. When I met her by the pool, Allegra was wearing a long blanket. She smiled, greeting me, but did not hug me. "Go to the pool house, your gift is there," she grinned. On the table in the pool house lay a large gift in a beautiful package. "Please open it now. I want to see if you like it," she said. I opened it up to find a complete high-end artist's kit containing every type of brush imaginable, a palette, a folding easel, several canvases, and a variety of paints, as well as several pieces of equipment that I did not recognize. It must have cost at least several $1,000s. "Wow," came out of my mouth unconsciously. "Amazing. Thank you very much, Mrs. Van Rensselaer. From your exhibitions at the art fair and from our conversations, I know that although you will study business, at heart, you are an aspiring artist. I hope this gift brings you pleasure." "Thank you very much," I repeated. "Everything here is so complicated that I don't even know what it all means." "I used to draw a little myself," she smiled. "Let me explain everything." Allegra told me what these things were that I didn't recognize and explained how to use them. Then, after her explanation, I saw her pull one thread on the front of her bedspread, revealing her gorgeous naked body underneath. When she saw my eyes widen, she asked in a voice that was even more sultry for her, "Did you expect anything different when I called you, Kevin? Or were you hoping for something other than an artist's set?" We barely spoke for the next 110 minutes. This experience was even better than the first because we mostly used a large, soft lounge chair for our sessions, which was much more comfortable than the table and basement setting of our first hookup. After passionate sex, as I walked out, leg in front, and more sexually satisfied than any man has any right to be, carrying her heavy artist's kit with both hands, Allegra came up to me. She gave me one last passionate kiss that almost reached my soul. Remember, our little secret. And then she dived naked into the pool. Once again, my thoughts were clouded until college orientation and lacrosse practice began in earnest the following Wednesday. I finally pulled my head out of my ass and made a conscious, mostly successful, attempt to get the right beauty I call Mrs. Van Rensselaer out of my head. I loved college, started out as a forward on the lacrosse team, went to business school while taking as many art classes as I could fit into my schedule, and was more than just a hit with the ladies, including my steady girlfriend Lizbeth, at the end of the second and beginning of the third year. The only bummer was that I no longer had connections with Allegra, although Van and I were still best friends, and I saw Allegra in the summer and on vacation. Either there was no opportunity or she was not interested in another session. She still looked as prim and proper and devastatingly gorgeous as any other time I'd seen her, and I imagined red garters holding black nylons up her sculpted thighs. A very fortunate circumstance arose during my third-year lacrosse season. Van's team was on the road, including playing against my college team on Saturday at 1 p.m. Since we both played as forwards, we didn't have much contact during the game, but of course we were on the field at the same time. Van was the star of his team, and I, although I was the starter, was probably the fifth or sixth best guy on mine. George and Allegra didn't have many chances to see Van play, so they took this game as an opportunity to do so. They hadn't seen me play since high school, so I was excited to play, especially because of my interludes with Allegra. The game was amazing. Wen finished as the top scorer with 6 goals and 1 assist. I had the best game of my life with 4 goals and 3 assists, including the game-winning goal with 18 seconds left to give my team an 11-10 win. Van and I were joined on the field after the game by George and Allegra, and, as always, Van was a good sport, even if he was disappointed with the result. After exchanging pleasantries and summing up the game, George said, "I have a late flight to catch on a business trip, and I know Van has to be at his team hotel by 11 p.m., but maybe Allegra and I can treat you both, and your girlfriend Lizbeth, Kevin, to an early dinner at the Four Seasons, where Allegra and I were staying." I jumped at this chance for many reasons. The dinner was stylish, delicious, and fun. Lizbeth was very impressed with the Rensselaers, especially Allegra. Allegra and I behaved the same way we always did with each other, except for those cases when we were left alone. True, she did not fail to inform everyone that a limousine was waiting for her at the airport the next morning. As we said goodbye, George took the limousine to the airport, and Lizbeth and I took Van to his team hotel. Allegra did an unusual thing. She shook my hand goodbye. She never hugged in public, other than to lightly hug Van or George. In her hand was a small piece of paper. I quickly put it in my pocket. Before we got into my car, I sneaked a look at it, and it said, Lux 1501. As Lizbeth and I were driving Van to the hotel where his team was staying before heading to another college for Monday's game, Lizbeth said, "Van, your dad and stepmom are so cool. Lucky you. In fact, when I grow up, I want to be as stylish and beautiful as your stepmother." I felt uneasy when the first thought that came to my mind after her words was, "I wish you could have sex like her too." I chastised myself sternly until I let Van go, hugging him goodbye and wishing him luck in the next game. Lizbeth and I talked some more on the way to her dorm and in the parking lot. I begged her not to go anywhere else, saying that I was very tired. She had a great time at dinner, so she didn't ask me to leave. I kissed her goodbye, and instead of going to the hostel, I went to the Four Seasons Hotel. Allegra opened the door to room 1501 a few seconds after I knocked. She wore a short robe that showed off her long, sculpted legs. "Hi, Kevin. It's good that you came. I really need a back massage." What?" I asked, again slightly slurring my tongue. I felt a tug in my back when I was working out in the hotel fitness center after the game. I gave you the note in hopes that you could rub my back a little to make it feel better. You didn't expect anything different, did you?" she asked, with a sly grin. "Oh, No, not really, I whined. Throwing off her robe and revealing her magnificent naked body, she said, I'll just lie on the bed until you take off your coat, tie, and all the other items that cause you discomfort. With that, she lay face down on the huge four-poster bed in her luxury hotel room. I obediently took off my coat and tie, as well as my shirt, pants, shoes, and socks, leaving only my boxers. She didn't see this because her back was to me. While I lay next to her and massaged her back, we had a general conversation, mostly from her. Some of the topics she wanted to discuss ranged between pleasant and uncomfortable, including Lisbeth, who she said she really liked. Details of how I scored the winning goal, what I thought about her, and whether I was drawing something using the kit she gave me. After about 10 minutes without raising her head to look at me, she asked, "Could you be so nice as to sit on me, pressing hard on the small of my back?" "Okay," I replied, taking off my boxers. "Oh, yes, right here, Kevin." She moaned several times. After a few minutes, she raised her head slightly and said, "Wow, you did a good job. Do you mind if I turn over so you can rub my front a little?" "No problem," I said, moving away from her. Turning over, she couldn't help but see my boner. "Kevin, I didn't expect you to take off all your clothes," she teased. "I think you couldn't hold on like a healthy 21-year-old. After a few amazing rounds and a very nice shower, she gave me a little blue pill and a glass of water. "Since you'll be staying here all night, you might need one of George's little helpers," she grinned. I wasn't sure I needed it, but why take the risk? So I agreed. When we were lying in an embrace, I turned her face towards me and said seriously, "Allegra." She interrupted me and said softly with a smile, "Mrs. Van Rensselaer, if I may, Kevin, it's much more obscene." "Okay, Mrs. Van Rensselaer," I smiled. "At the risk of causing your irritation, I still have to ask you 2 questions. Will you promise not to kick me out if you don't like them?" Allegra smiled. "If I don't like them, I can spank you. But since I really need to enjoy your sexual services until the morning, I won't kick you out." Okay then, the first of 2 questions. "Do you have any other guys besides me that you play with?" I asked, wincing in anticipation of her hitting me in the face. Instead, she answered quickly and decisively, without any malice. "No, I have no one. Since I started dating George, the only 2 men I've had sex with are you and him." I sighed, relieved in more ways than one. "My second and last question. Someone as beautiful, sultry, smart, and stylish as you, why were you looking for me to have an affair with me?" Allegra bit her lip, and a few tears appeared in one eye. After a long pause, I said, "Listen, if for some reason it's difficult for you to answer a question, then don't. I'm taking it off." "No," she answered. "I think that for your edification and for my emotional well-being, I must answer this question." She then got out of bed and walked over to her suitcase. The sight of her naked body led to the expected result, but she did not pay any attention to it, as she handed me a 13x18 photograph in a light frame. It was a photo of me leaning against a large tree, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, smiling. However, there were several problems with it. The first problem with the photograph was that the only time I remembered being photographed against such a background was when I was 17 years old, and the way I looked in the photograph was similar to me now, at 21. Secondly, I don't remember ever having such long hair, and certainly not recently. Third, I was wearing a Princeton t-shirt, which I never owned and don't remember ever wearing. "Did you Photoshop my photo?" I asked, looking at her carefully for a full minute. "I don't remember ever wearing a Princeton t-shirt, and I've never had hair that long." A few more tears appeared in Allegra's eyes before she answered, "This is not a photo of you. This is a photo of my late first husband, Brandon, the love of my life, on his 22nd birthday when he was starting graduate school at Princeton." I swallowed hard. In fact, I think my brain floated a little, and if I had been standing, I might have fallen and hit my head. Suddenly, Allegra's expression and temporary loss of speech when we met at her wedding with George rushed into my mind again. So that's why she swallowed so hard. Her eyes bulged, and she lost her composure for a few seconds when she met 17-year-old me. I asked myself. I looked at the photograph again. I'll be damned if I could say it wasn't me without the previously mentioned inconsistencies. He was definitely my double. I didn't know what to say or do. After another delay, Allegra wiped the tears from her eyes, took the photo from me, and carefully placed it on the nightstand next to the bed. After we uncoupled, before falling asleep, I muttered in her ear, "I love you." Her eyes quickly found mine. She grinned wryly and replied, "I know." Then she began to sob quietly and buried her face in my shoulder, and I hugged her tightly. My brain felt fried from everything that had happened that day, but I was so physically and emotionally exhausted that I soon found myself in dreamland. I woke up from Allegra's kiss, and when I looked at the alarm clock by the bed, it showed 7:22. "I have a flight at 9:30, Kevin. Do you think you could give me a ride to the airport so we can have more time together?" "After a fun shower, of course," she said with a big grin, and then kissed him again. We took a fun shower again, in the large, ornate shower stall in the bathroom of her Four Seasons suite. Before we got dressed, I took a photo of her with my iPhone as she bent slightly, reaching for her bra. When I dropped Allegra off at the airport, she held my face in her hands. "Two things, Kevin. First, I'm sorry for dumping information on you about my late first husband, but it was a legitimate answer to your question." She kissed me, swallowed, and then continued, "Secondly, I would really like you to paint my portrait in oil on canvas. Maybe you can make it this summer?" I smiled. "There are no problems with the first, but on the second I'm ahead of you." She kissed me passionately in a way that curled my toes, then grabbed her suitcase and walked into the airport without looking back. As usual, when I was dealing with Allegra, especially after our unparalleled sexual encounter, my mind was a complete mess for several days. How could it be otherwise, after she dropped the bombshell on me about my doppelgänger, my first husband? I told her I loved her. She replied, "I know," and then sobbed herself to sleep on my chest. However, I was very motivated and, despite the demands of classes, lacrosse, and social life, I was able to gather my thoughts and make a portrait of Allegra from the photograph I had taken, using materials from the expensive art kit that Allegra had given me. So that it could be seen by others without revealing our sexual relationship, I gave her face and some exposed parts of her body an unearthly quality so that she could not be recognized. When I finished working on the portrait, on a 46x74 canvas, golden rectangle, I packed it securely in a box and sent it to Allegra. Allegra called me after receiving the portrait and seemed very emotional, thanking me for it. "I'll find a gallery to display it," she said, but I didn't think much of it. When I returned home the summer between my third and fourth years of college, I learned that my parents would be moving to Florida at the start of the school year. However, this was not even close to the strangest thing that happened that summer. After I had only been home a week and had not yet seen Allegra, George called me. After exchanging pleasantries, including how much he enjoyed the trip to watch Van and I play lacrosse, he got down to business. "Kevin, I need a favor. As you may or may not know, Allegra has organized a charity ball for leukemia research, which will take place in 2 weeks this Saturday at the Grand Hotel, and I'll be out of town this weekend on business. May I ask you to accompany her to the ball?" I was stunned. Of course, I would have agreed, but apparently I paused while everything settled in my head. This obviously signaled to George that he needed to persuade me. He promised to pay for the rent of a tuxedo and limousine, as well as a new pair of shoes if I needed them, and apparently was ready to go further when I didn't stop him. "Of course, Mr. Van Rensselaer. I will be happy to go with Mrs. Van Rensselaer." "Great! I'll have her call you about the details," he replied, and then ended the call after more small talk. I sat there, glassy-eyed, processing what I had heard when my phone buzzed again. It was Allegra. "Hello, Kevin. This is Mrs. Van Rensselaer. I know you just talked to George, and I'm glad you can help us." "With pleasure, Mrs. Van Rensselaer," I replied. "One question, however. Do you know any ballroom dancing?" "No. Usually I just dance to fast music. Would you mind if I asked you to take a few lessons, at my expense, before the ball? It's important for my image that I dance. And at these events there are always some creeps, so I want all my dances to be with you, and you can't have two left feet. This won't interfere with your summer job. In fact, I have an offer for a new summer job for you. Sure, I guess, I answered hesitantly. Long story short, over the next 2 weeks, I took 5 evening ballroom dancing lessons, and during the 6th lesson, Allegra came to class and danced with me. She smiled and whispered in my ear, "It's a pity that I can't take care of you right now. Maybe sometime before the end of the summer," which only intensified his tone. I behaved like a perfect gentleman at the ball, and, under Allegra's instructions, stayed close to her the entire evening and prevented at least a dozen guys from interfering while we danced. Only one, clearly drunk, needed more than a remark and a frown. And I was proud of myself for being firm with him without flying into a rage. As Allegra and I rode back to her mansion in the limousine that would take me back to my parents after they dropped her off, she thanked me profusely. Then, so that the driver wouldn't hear, she whispered in my ear, "I would love to invite you, but that will have to wait," causing an instant reaction. Allegra then continued, "I'm offering you another summer job. One of the charitable organizations on whose board I'm in need of summer help is teaching art to children from low-income families and taking them out into nature. I will personally pay you 25% more than you make at your current summer job if you agree." Since I didn't like my current summer job, I enthusiastically accepted. Allegra didn't say that the job would require almost daily contact with her. This was both a big bonus and also frustrating because I couldn't take any liberties. She went with a group of kids I was counseling to every art museum and gallery in the area and on field trips to parks and the zoo. Allegra always seemed to be keeping a close eye on me, no matter what I was doing, but avoiding all but fleeting physical contact. When we went to the best gallery in the city, our neighborhood was a suburb of, I was shocked to see my portrait of Allegra, which I called Euphoria, prominently displayed in a perfect high-quality frame with a $15,000 price tag. What surprised me even more was that the price tag said, "Sold out," in red ink, and "Will deliver in September," in small print. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the portrait. "You need money for school and to start life after college, and although the painting sold after being on display for only a week, the gallery owner insisted that it remain on display until September. At that time, I will give you $14,000, $15,000 sale price less gallery commission," Allegra said. Then, for the first time all summer since the charity ball, she gave me a quick peck on the lips and left. Allegra's surprise for me had to be reciprocated, so in the summer I arranged it for her. I took the same portrait, only this time I didn't blur anything. If you knew Allegra, you would understand that in the portrait it is her, in all her naked glory. On the last Saturday before I returned to college for my senior year, Allegra asked me to go on a walk with her, during which she would give me a receipt for the painting I sold. Although I didn't tell her about it in advance, this was my chance to give her my new portrait, which I called Proper Beauty. What she didn't tell me was that our excursion was for a date at the Lapis Lazuli Hotel about 60 miles away. Over the course of 4 hours that afternoon, I had a sexual experience that surpassed even the other 3 sexual experiences I had with Allegra. It was hard to tell the difference until I finally realized that our intercourse was not only as physically pleasurable as ever, but there was also a stronger emotional component to it, especially on her part, which meant that, in addition, before sex, we sometimes made love. After the final shower, she gave me the receipt from the sale of the painting, and I gave her my new portrait. Unfolding it, she exclaimed with tears in her eyes, "I fell in love with him, but I can't leave him. Anyone who sees it will understand that I had an intimate relationship with the artist. Hide it somewhere away and look at it only if you miss it," I answered. After that remark, she came at me with every ounce of emotion in her body, and I thought we were going to start fornicating again and have to shower again before she pulled herself together. We had a very pleasant drive home, although during the drive I wondered whether I would ever see her again, since I had no compelling reason to return to my hometown after my parents moved, and since I knew that Van, after graduating university, had already found a job about 500 miles from home. When Allegra dropped me off in a secluded part of the park a quarter-mile from my parents' house, we kissed passionately. "Will I ever see you again?" I asked. "Stranger things have happened," she replied. And again, after the interlude with Allegra, my thoughts were confused for the next 2 weeks. I had a bit of a social life my senior year, but not much. As I feared, Allegra ruined my sexual relationships with other women. Although I had gotten laid a few times, I compared my partners to Allegra, which meant that any hope of a relationship was doomed. During the school year, I did not see Allegra again. I did have some contact with her, however, as I sent her 4 paintings of women in fighting poses and against wild backgrounds, and she sold them to the same gallery that sold Euphoria. Those 4 pictures were good, but they didn't have a piece of my soul in them like Euphoria did, so they sold for $7,500 to $2,000. But it was enough, along with the $14,000 for Euphoria and the fact that I was still on a lacrosse scholarship and had a summer job, that when I graduated from college, I had enough money for a working car and a 2-bedroom apartment for myself. After graduating from college in the late spring when I had just turned 23, I got a job with a large company in a city about 800 miles from my hometown. What I really liked about this city was its vibrant art community, as I wanted to continue to paint and learn more techniques, dreaming of eventually becoming a full-time artist. I had been in my new apartment for about 10 days and had already finished my first week of work when there was a knock on my door late on Saturday morning. Since I didn't really know anyone yet, I was very surprised. When I opened the door, Allegra was standing there with a suitcase in her hands. "Hi, Kevin," she smiled. Hello, Mrs. Van Rensselaer," I stammered. "You can't call me that anymore," she grinned, raising her left hand with her ring finger exposed. "Allegra will do, and my surname has returned to my maiden name, Hurst." "What? What happened?" "Invite me and I'll tell you." She grinned. "Oh, sorry. Come in," I stuttered, moving out of the way. As she passed me, she quickly kissed me on the cheek. "Long story short, George found out about your portrait, Proper Beauty, and asked me about it. I may be a cheater, but I'm not a liar." So I told him what he meant. He was very upset, especially since I didn't apologize. When he calmed down the next day, I told him the real state of affairs, and we got divorced, she said dispassionately. "How did he find it?" I asked. "We'll give that answer another time," she giggled. I had never heard her giggle before. "What was the reality of the situation?" I asked, temporarily speechless. "Before I tell you, I want you to answer one question," Allegra said, rising from her seat, coming to me and sitting on my lap. Looking carefully into my eyes, she said, "You once said that you loved me. Is this still true?" I sighed heavily, hoping that everything was going the way I wanted, so, taking a chance on not having my heart broken, I replied, "Yes. No, I take my words back. Hell yes." Allegra smiled. "Then I can tell you the real situation. I fell in love with you, and I couldn't stay with George if I had the chance to be with you. I eschewed uncertainty. The fact that you have a suitcase means that you are staying at a hotel? That means I need to stop somewhere. I was hoping it could be here with you if you could handle being 35 when you're only 23, she replied, biting her lip. Where are the rest of your things? Long-term storage and climate control, there's no problem with that, she replied. If you stay here, what does that mean? I asked. This means that over the next year we will see whether we are destined to be together. I think most likely yes. After all, I had a 2-month compatibility interview with you last summer, where we only had sex for 4 hours, but did clothed activities together for at least 200 hours. So I think we'll figure out what's good we suit each other. Did you interview me? I grinned. What do you think I was trying to achieve by being in close non-sexual contact with you for so many hours? I wanted to know if we fit each other with or without clothes. I believe so, and over the next year we will be able to verify this. Can you endure life in a two-room apartment after living in mansions all your life? I can't wait to try it. In a year, we will be able to reevaluate both our relationships and our living conditions. Perhaps you will find me too demanding, and it will be too difficult for me to live without all the privileges of wealth. We can't know until we try. And one thing I know for sure is that there is no problem with our sexual compatibility, right? She grinned. No, there's no problem with that, I laughed. However, I need to know if I'm just Brandon's second in command, and you need to tell me the whole story of his life and death. Allegra became serious and paused before answering. You started out as Brandon's second in command. Then, as I got to know you better and you matured, I began to love you for who you were, even though the fact that you looked just like Brandon didn't hurt. Anyway, I fell in love with you last summer, so no, you're definitely not Brandon's second in command. As for telling you the full story of him, I may never be able to tell it. It's very difficult for me to talk about this. I kissed her and we made love. No simple sex, only sexual and emotional connection. Thus began a great experiment. Can a couple in which the woman is 12 years older than the man, from different social classes, in a relationship that began because the man looked like the deceased love of the woman's life, be happy together? Things didn't go entirely smoothly. Allegra actually had some difficulty adapting to a normal life rather than a rich one. However, she never complained about it, and the only thing she successfully lobbied for was a new bed. The rented double was uncomfortable, and since most of our communication took place between the sheets, she bought a first-class double bed and returned the rented one. For me, I had to help Allegra interact with normal people in many situations, but I never forced anything on her, and she sincerely wanted to see what it was like to be normal. She was not interested in working for money, but was involved in several charities, but rarely used her money to support us. We lived almost exclusively, with small exceptions, such as a vacation in Aruba during the worst winter period, on my earnings. One thing Allegra constantly did was encourage my painting. I sold no more than a couple of new works for little money, but that didn't stop her. She knew that I loved painting much more than my job, which I kept only to earn money. Another sign that our relationship could survive was that our sexual passion for each other had not waned one iota. On a scale of 1 to 10, our sexual satisfaction remained 11 the entire time we lived in my apartment. After we had been together for about 9 months, I was convinced that we were deeply in love. I know we were. And I became so hopeful for the future that I bought her an engagement ring. Even though it was about 1/4 smaller than what George gave her, I knew she would love it just as much, if not more. The engagement ring was in one of my drawers, hidden under my clothes, and I wondered when I would have the courage to propose to an obscenely rich goddess 12 years older than me. After a truly emotional lovemaking session on Saturday night, with thoughts of a wedding ring running through my mind, Allegra, without looking at me, with her head on my chest, said, "Kevin, there may be a reason why we might want to move in less than a year, or at least find somewhere we can move to quickly after living here for a year." "Why?" I asked. "Well, I don't know how, but I got the birth dates mixed up. Maybe because I'm so happy and in love that I just didn't think about it. But I'm 7 weeks pregnant," she said quietly. She said it so quietly that I wasn't sure if I heard her correctly. So I lifted her chin so that she was looking at me and asked, "You said you were pregnant?" She nodded her head and then began to cry quietly. "I swear, I didn't do this to tie you to me. I would never have tried to tie you to me if you—" I interrupted her. "Be quiet," I barked. She continued to cry quietly as I stood up, walked over to the dresser and took out my wedding ring. I returned to bed, opened the ring box, and, looking into her eyes, asked, "Will you make me the happiest person in the world by marrying me?" She was sobbing so hard that I couldn't understand what she was saying, but given that she extended her left hand towards me with her fingers spread, I realized that she wanted to say yes, and I put the ring on her ring finger. 10 days before my apartment lease was up, we moved into a beautiful, but decidedly not ostentatious, 4-bedroom house that Allegra had bought. A week later, we got married in a small ceremony. I quit my job and now paint full-time, in addition to taking care of our 2 children, a boy who looks like me and a girl who looks like Allegra. I earn enough from selling my works to afford to buy all our food and clothes for me and the children. I can't afford Allegra's clothes. Allegra provides the remaining support. I am becoming famous in the art world for paintings of beautiful women in fighting poses, and after death, I may even become famous. I became very good at dancing. I've had a lot of practice since Allegra either organizes or attends all sorts of charity balls. In fact, I think I can say, in all modesty, that we are the best and most enthusiastic dancers wherever we go, and I never ever let anyone else dance with her. 5 years into my marriage to the woman I love with all my heart, I am happier than I ever thought I could be. Although I never broached the subject of Brandon after our wedding, I sometimes asked with a smile how exactly George found the right beauty I drew from Allegra, which now hangs proudly in our living room, and which was the reason for their divorce. However, it was only after 5 years of marriage that I learned all the details of this. One sunny spring morning, when our whole family was in a good mood, the children and I were tickling Allegra, and she begged us to stop. "Not until you tell us exactly how George found out about proper beauty," I chuckled. Okay, she laughed. I hung it in the bedroom on the wall above his bed. As I stood stunned, she practically threw our almost 5-year-old giggling daughter at me, picked up her 2-year-old son and said, "Now that everything is settled, let's go to the park." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.